let's take a moment to talk about note-taking on the market steer class we just judged. And I start with an example of a stenographer's pad that we suggest to livestock judging contestants. There's a number of reasons we suggest this size notebook and why, but we begin by showing you an example of a legal pad, which you would find in an office supply store, typically on the same shelf as you're going to find the stenographer's pad that we suggest you use in judging competitions. I've put a set of reading glasses on the legal pad, which is typical 8 by 11 legal size, just for perspective. And that stenographer's pad that we discuss, we like using these and feel like they work well in judging competition because of the size, the fact that they are spiral bound on top, which permits judging contestants to flip from class to class as they would go through a judging competition. And the size of this notebook actually permits you to stuff it in your waistband or into your belt as you would handle a set of market lambs or a set of market steers. And so that's why we recommend the typical steno pad that you'll be able to find at most office supply stores. Now let's use this stenographer's pad and actually open up to a page and talk about working through a set of notes on that class of market steers. If students were in a judging competition, they might beforehand, if they had the list of the 6 to 12 classes that were going to be in the judging contest that day, go through and pre-number and pre-name the pages in the order that they'll actually judge the classes. But if that's not possible, we can always walk up to each class as we get to it. And in this case, I would just head the page with "This is the crossbred market steer class." And then working back through those descriptions of each of the 4 market steers, I would want to take a set of notes using 3, 4, 5 lines out of this stenographer's pad that would help me to remember each one of those market steers later in the day, because oftentimes in judging competition, we may see a class early in the day that we place and take notes on, and may not give oral reasons on that class until much later in the day after judging 8 to 10 other classes and maybe even giving as much as 6 to 7 other sets of reasons prior to getting back to that particular class. And so a set of notes that help us to remember each individual steer is critical to doing a good job in the judging competition and giving a good set of oral reasons. So back to this particular class. I would always suggest to students to begin with ID points. The number 1 steer in this class was a calf we called a black-nosed smoke, and he was very clean sheathed. Again, a unique ID on him we could use to refer to him in a set of reasons in order to avoid redundancy in referring to him as number 1 all the way through the set. That was a steer that was very clean fronted, got a little easy topped, rounded in his hip, shallowed a little bit through his rear rib and flank. So his balance, we called it average. Some may want to actually quantify certain traits like balance with a number. If that's the case, you may refer back to when we walked through the criticism of each of those steers earlier in the video, and I said that on a scale of 1 to 10, I would call 1 a steer with about a 5 score for balance, or an average. That steer with respect to muscle, we called average to a little above, so I put a plus out here after average and describe it that he has some expression but lacks dimension of muscle. He's a calf that in terms of finish handles somewhat thin over his lower rear rib, and I quantify that at about 3/500ths of an inch of cover. The number 2 steer in that class was a solid black steer with a big sheath, very good bodied steer, long strided, sound footed steer, a calf that in terms of muscle was definitely better than average, rate him a plus plus, call him very thick topped, thick hipped. In terms of finish, a very correctly finished steer, very uniform in his handle, and call him right at 4/10ths of an inch. And a calf that in terms of overall, I didn't quantify his balance score, but his balance was pretty solid. Don't really have a lot of criticism written down about that steer, but those are the things on number 2 that I believe would help me to remember him quite vividly later in a judging competition. The number 3 steer, another black-nosed smoke, but a calf that's unique in his markings. He's a steer that has some black pigment on the sides of his mouth and jaw, and on the sides of his body. Students can decide how they want to go about IDing that particular calf, but he is kind of unique, not only being a black-nosed smoke, but having some of that black pigment and other spots on him. Number 3 is a very well-balanced steer, very straight in his lines, very good-bodied, very bold sprung. He is a somewhat short-strided steer when he gets out on the lead. He's a correctly finished steer. I quantify him at 3/800ths to 4/10ths of an inch, and a very powerful steer that I'd call the heaviest muscled, biggest topped, biggest hip, and biggest arm is what I have written there to help me remember him. Overall, a lot of positives on the 3 steer. Number 4, the black and white steer in class, a very straight line steer, a very good structured steer that was big-footed, got out and moved in good shape, a very shallow-bodied steer that's thin finished, very bare to the handle, quantify his finish at only 2/10ths of an inch, and a very light muscled steer that was very narrow made. Again, these are the kind of notes that a student would take and write down on a class of steers over the 12 to 14 minutes that they would have in a judging competition to actually critically evaluate that class and those steers individually. And we would work from this set of notes on individual steers and fitting that into a reasons format. Students can refer to the OSU Livestock Judging Manual for the section of that that actually contains the outline or format for which to fit things into a set of oral reasons for this class. And in a moment later in this video, we'll move toward listening to a member of the OSU Livestock Judging team actually give a formal set of oral reasons on the class of market steers we've previously seen, using this set of notes as an example of how to fit it into that format.